Chapter 4. The Word is given to men, women, and children. Art is a lie which makes us realize the truth. Picasso. Here's another metaphor for you. I like to picture truth as a gigantic, age-old fossil buried deep in the earth. Our task is to dig and excavate, searching for whatever bits of this fossil we can find. Countless men and women throughout history have worked tirelessly, attempting to unearth fragments of this great fossil, little by little, one grain of sand at a time. Some of them have uncovered several square inches of the surface. Many have contributed just a little, and others have unwittingly, yet likely with good intentions, dug in the wrong places, sometimes carelessly dumping their sand in areas previously uncovered by others. The point is that while much of the fossil remains buried, a good amount of work has already been done by wise and diligent individuals who have gone before. God imparteth his word unto men and women also. Now this is not all. Little children do have words given unto them many times, which confound the wise and the learned. In short, we don't have to tackle our search for truth on our own, from scratch. We are blessed to live in an age when much of the work done by these passionate and inspired people is readily accessible, easy for us to observe and study. Our task then is to seek out of the best books words of wisdom, seek learning, even by study and also by faith. What are the best books? Charlotte Mason, a British educator at the turn of the 20th century, coined the term living books, a concept I like to use as a guideline for the kind of books I read to seek learning, even by study. Perhaps the most vivid definition of living books comes from Ray Bradbury in what has been called his love letter to books, Fahrenheit 451. To me, it means texture. This book has pores. It has features. This book can go under the microscope. You'd find life under the glass, streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That's my definition anyway. Telling detail. Fresh detail. The good writers touch life often. The mediocre ones run a quick hand over her. The bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. I love this declaration that good writers touch life often. To borrow the words of Shakespeare, a living book is a book which holds as 'twere the mirror up to nature. In the less poetic language of E.F. Schumacher, a living book is a work teeming with the most vital ideas about the inner development of man, showing the whole grandeur and misery of a human existence. Charlotte Mason would have agreed with such a description of books teeming with ideas. She taught that ideas are food for our minds, and that living books provide a feast of ideas of the highest quality, great and vital ideas, as Schumacher puts it, which expand the reader's mind and provide a new lens through which to view the world. Such a book touches its readers deeply. The very best living books change you forever. I recognize that this description is somewhat vague, immeasurable, and open to interpretation. To help you get a clearer sense of what constitutes a living book, allow me to identify what makes a book not living. Books that, as Bradbury so graphically put it, rape life and leave her for the flies. Charlotte Mason called such writings twaddle. Twaddle, of course, is the opposite of living literature. Mason described it as the white ashes out of which the last spark of the fire of original thought has long since died. Twaddle is diluted and stale, presenting a single grain of pure knowledge in a whole gallon of talk, imposing upon the reader the labor of discerning the grain and of extracting it from the worthless flood. Twaddle is predictable, weak, and shallow reading. It is silly, idle, trivial, and void of enlightening mind-food ideas. As one online commenter put it, twaddle is to reading as a Hostess Twinkie is to eating. But just as sweet and savory candy and junk food draw our attention and tempt our appetites, while eating vegetables tends to be a chore, living books very often take a back seat to flashy, sugary twaddle which offers mental food of a poor quality but a titillating nature. Think, for example, of a spicy romance story or an artificially flavored action plot. We are all familiar with the effects which a diet heavy in sweets and fast food has on the body. Could an intellectual diet consisting only of alluring yet unnourishing twaddle have a similar effect upon the mind? What might mental malnutrition or cerebral starvation look like? Schumacher observed, "The way in which we experience and interpret the world obviously depends very much indeed on the kind of ideas that fill our minds. If those ideas are mainly small, weak, superficial, and incoherent, life will appear insipid, uninteresting, petty, and chaotic." Studies show that our media consumption habits influence us in important ways, shaping our thinking and political preferences, even affecting our cognitive ability. Without our even realizing it, the media we consume, including of course the books we read, unconsciously sculpts our paradigms and our perceptions of reality. If twaddle is all that's on the menu, our minds might become quite sickly, misshapen, and distorted. Jane Austen made this point a central theme of her first complete novel, Northanger Abbey, in which the young protagonist Catherine becomes heavily influenced by the overly dramatic and sensational novels she enjoys reading. As a result, she jumps to some comically absurd and unrealistic conclusions about the people and environment around her, leading to messy misunderstandings and uncomfortable situations. Luckily for Catherine, the story ends happily as she becomes aware of the faulty ideas planted in her mind and corrects her warped perceptions before they lead her to any irreversible, tragic consequences. Whether or not we are aware of it, each of us is likewise being influenced by the mental food we consume. If you learn to identify living books and choose to regularly feast on them, while limiting your exposure to twaddle, the nourishing ideas within them will feed and sustain your mind and soul, expanding your understanding of the world around you. Living media. Now, perhaps your eyes have been glazing over as you've been listening for the last few minutes. Maybe reading isn't currently a habit for you, and you feel no particular pull to start. Therefore, all this talk of books may not seem applicable to you. But even if you don't consider yourself a reader, in our age of smartphones and sleepless connectivity, are not our minds virtually force-fed hundreds of ideas every day? In Charlotte Mason's time, over 100 years ago, means of spreading ideas were far more limited, books being a primary method. She, of course, was not acquainted with the many different forms of media that surround us today. Yet surely the principles we've been discussing in this chapter remain equally applicable, and I would argue even more important, in modern times. While I feel that great books remain the source most densely packed with living ideas, particularly works of fiction, I believe that all the many forms of media available for us to consume can and ought to be measured on the scale of living versus twaddle. Expanding this standard of living to include not only books but all media will help us to more consciously notice and evaluate the ideas we're being fed from any source at any moment. Living media could include films, plays, TV shows, and videos, paintings, sculptures, and other forms of visual art, music and dance, podcasts, social media posts, news articles, video games, online tutorials and courses, and many other forms of art, entertainment, and recreation. Even our in-person interactions may vary in vitality, some being rich, inspired, and thought-provoking, others shallow or mundane. In each of these categories, one could find specific pieces of media teeming with ideas. On the other hand, many examples could be conjured up at the mere tap of a touchscreen of media possessing a more twaddle-like nature, often offering gallons and gallons of talk, rarely presenting so much as a single small grain of wisdom. Mason couldn't have possibly imagined how fitting the words worthless flood would one day become. We've all felt the sensation that comes after having mindlessly scrolled through an aptly named social media feed, or after binging one nonsense video after another. It's a sluggish, empty feeling, not unlike what many a trick-or-treater experiences after devouring all his spoils at the end of a Halloween night. I've come to take that feeling as a fairly reliable sign that I've consumed idea-deficient twaddle, and it requires no major stretch of the imagination to see how regularly ingesting such readily accessible, sterile, silly media, be it a YouTube video, a Spotify playlist, or a TikTok compilation, could be equal to a steady diet of cognitive candy corn and spiritual Snickers. Now, you may be tempted to discount this living media twaddle dichotomy as merely a matter of taste, that I'm being snobbish and simply looking down my nose at books and movies that don't align with my tastes or interests. But the reality is that I have encountered books and films and songs and other works of art which I did not necessarily find appealing or likable, but which I had to admit fit the definition of living. Nor am I free from guilty pleasures, some light or entertaining works which I still enjoy from time to time, even if they aren't especially nourishing. Seeking living books and media is not nearly so much a matter of taste, of likes and dislikes, as it is about viewing our media consumption through a different lens. It's about awakening to the fact that all the media we consume, and the way we consume it, greatly affects our minds and hearts. It's about becoming intentional about the kind of ideas we devour. Often, the choices we make regarding the media we consume are motivated by a desire to merely be entertained or distracted, to simply pass the time. But what kind of food are we feeding our minds when we consume in such a passive, absent-minded way? This, then, is my invitation to you. Take ownership of the media you consume. Get in the habit of asking yourself why you're reading that book or watching that video or scrolling through that news feed. Take notice of the ideas that flood your mind as you do so. If, while cultivating this kind of deliberate relationship with the media you consume, a certain podcast or painting or article inspires you with interesting, sustaining, perspective-broadening thoughts which, in Alan Bloom's words, challenge you to discover new experiences and reassess old, then you've likely stumbled upon a piece of living media. That brings me to one more point I would like to make. As I've introduced this topic, I've tried to refrain from giving specific examples of living books or media. I haven't provided a list of recommended books, articles, bloggers, or podcasters. As I pointed out, the criterion of teeming with ideas is somewhat ambiguous and open to interpretation. I believe this may actually be a positive feature of the concept of living media. It suggests that the largest contributing factor to whether or not a work is living is not whether it resembles this specific film or that particular book. It's how you consume the piece of media, your consumption habits. After all, even if your bookshelves are full of the wisest, most wonderful, most nourishing books in the world, not one of those books is worth anything if it's just collecting dust. And if you do decide to pull one down and crack it open, but only read it in a rote, mindless way, its worth has increased very little. Don't get me wrong, the more particles of truth per square inch, the better. It certainly does matter if the media in question is of great gravity, as Bloom puts it, and light, sugary twaddle is best touched only seldom, if not at all. But what matters most is the level of gravity with which that media is consumed. If we begin to cultivate the attributes mentioned in the previous chapter, humility, an open mind, confidence in the freeing power of truth, curiosity, and so on, and integrate them with more conscious-minded media consumption habits, we will become more adept at discerning and extracting that single grain of pure knowledge, no matter how diluted or hidden. Even media that leans more toward the twaddle side will become more living for us. But, of course, we'll naturally begin to shy away from such intellectual snacking, and instead be drawn to the enriching, sustaining feast of ideas so densely laid out on the banquet table of the best books. These best books, from which we must seek learning, include primarily living books, whether in audio, electronic, or good old-fashioned print form. Other forms of living media can also supplement our search for truth. As we surround ourselves with a variety of living media and limit our consumption of life-raping twaddle, Our minds and spirits will be fed ideas, the one food, Mason wrote, whereby the intellectual life lives and grows. These ideas represent potential fragments of the fossil previously hidden to you, possible branches of truth to graft onto your own personal tree. Perhaps you hold in your hands a speck of ancient truth which, if adopted into your life, could change it forever. But we must not stop there. As Alfred North Whitehead is credited with saying, "Ideas won't keep. Something must be done about them." And what must we do about these ideas? We must test them to see if they are, in fact, bits of truth. Summary. Throughout history, many inspired men, women, and even children have shared bits of truth in living books, as well as in other forms of living media. Living media is media teeming with great and vital ideas that nourish and broaden your mind. All art, media, recreation, and even social interactions can be deemed either living or twaddle or somewhere in between. As we try to consume living media and limit our consumption of twaddle, ideas will enter our minds, potential truths to adopt into our lives. Questions. What kind of books and other media do I tend to consume? Would these media qualify as living, or do they more closely resemble twaddle? Why do I choose to consume this kind of media? What kind of ideas have I extracted from the media I consume?